area of ministry in and through the life of our church that has been greatly affected, I would even say altered by COVID, has been the global ministry. So today we want to talk about encouragements as it comes to global. It's been speculation and hope for the last couple of years, but we want to talk about encouragements today. So with me is Andrew Bradford. He is our global disciple-making pastor. That's a mouthful, but it's a very strategic title. So just briefly explain to those listening, what does your title mean? Global disciple-making pastor.
To many people, it's missions pastor.
Mm-hmm.
We use the word global on purpose. It's easier to say cross-culturally in a secure location. And it brings our mind to the end of our purpose statement, that we're talking about all the peoples of the world, talking about a global job, a global responsibility. And disciple making, the Great Commission. Right. We are called to make disciples of all nations. And disciple making has a double entente. We want to raise people up in the church. We want to mature disciples. We want to make disciples, make mature disciples. We also want to go out and bring disciples into the fold, making new disciples.
So in what you're doing, we're making disciples of our people. The goal is to make disciples where they are and ultimately to plant churches, which will replicate what we're doing.
That's right.
So it's much more than going on mission trips, and that's why we talk about strategy. We're glad that you're back in this role, Andrew, and it's obvious that you enjoy it. You've been a great source of encouragement just in how you've handled yourself over these last several months. So when the pandemic began, Scott Paulding was in this role, and Scott led a great effort to get us to praying for the unreached peoples and the workers. Since Scott has, by God's grace, back overseas, back serving, you've expanded this to connection to teams. So how has that specifically translated to encouragement as we have focused on teams in terms of global?
Well, we focus on teams because that's where we feel like we have the most focus and the most impact. The most focus meaning we have made a lot of relationships. And if you're not careful, making relationships can be a little bit scattered and broad, which is great in a lot of contexts. Not great for us. We prefer a rifle focus more than a shotgun focus. Yeah. So it's also helpful to teams because when you ask, how can we help you? You're devoted to that team.
Right.
You're not devoted all over the world or all over Central Asia even.
Right.
Now, some other churches do this, have that approach and do it really well. So I don't tell the church I'm thinking of that they shouldn't do it that way.
Right.
But this is how we've chosen to focus. We've chosen to focus on teams, be committed to those teams long term.
Yeah. And what teams are particularly focused on that have been encouragement to you?
So this is the reason I'm encouraged by this is because when I tell workers this, like when I'm in the context of workers from other places among other teams, they say, wow, those are 3 of the hardest to reach people. And I'm just glad that we can be in that kind of position to be going after these teams. The 3 people groups are the Caucasus, the Kurds, and the Uyghurs. Now, there's multiple people groups in the Caucasus, but those 3 areas of focus, the Caucasus peoples, the Kurds, and the Uyghurs.
And we didn't pick these people because they're all in the headlines. We picked these people prior to headlines.
That's right.
Now they're all in the headlines. And and a part of what's going on in the world. So, and it's been good to be able to focus there and to get this. Well, the Kurds have been in headlines for a long time. And if you don't know where these places are, come up to us in the lobby. We'll be glad to take you to a map.
There's a map on the wall just for that purpose.
And point out where these locations are and who these peoples are. So COVID has decreased a lot of things, and it decreased travel, but travel now has increased, people traveling all over the place, and now they're opening up other places in the world. So how has this translated into the global area? And in particularly for Andrew Bradford, we have a joke in our family. Andrew Bradford's happy place is an airport. I think you're the happiest. You're the only person I know that enjoys flying and being in an airport. I mean, that's a necessary evil to get to where I'm going, but you really do enjoy traveling. So where is it opened up for us, Andrew?
Yeah. West Virginia only took a brief hiatus during COVID.
Yeah.
We're involved in West Virginia now. We are seeking, you mentioned earlier, to plant the church among unreached peoples and places.
Yes.
Where we are in a reached location, we're seeking to establish church, strengthen the church, and so that's what it looks like in West Virginia. We're coming alongside people in West Virginia for the purpose of discipleship and encouragement, and that really has taken very little break. They have continued to go. The men and ladies who lead that are incredibly faithful, and they've done a good job persevering for many years now.
And making disciples.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
seeing
right.
people come to faith.
In both aspects. Seeing people come to faith and then seeing maturity happen as well.
Yeah, praise the Lord. Where else?
Yeah, so Boston and Phoenix, we have church planting relationships among the least reached in the U.S. Phoenix, we have been able to get back, more outside the city because we're not involved in the city proper of Phoenix. We're involved in other areas, smaller areas. We'd have been able to get back there, be encouragement to Valley Life church planners and partner with them. Yeah. Boston has been a slower process, right. A tighter place with COVID, right. More restrictions, etc. Things are loosening, and we are going back to Boston at the end of April. So I'm excited about that. It's been a couple of years since we've been there.
Yeah. And in terms of Central Asia, since November, what's happened?
That's right. We've been in Central Asia in November, December, January, February, and March.
That's unbelievable.
So we've been busy there as well.
All that time without being able to be there. So how have these trips brought encouragement to the teams and further developed our relationship with them?
So we say repeatedly that the purpose of short-term trips is member care and supporting the long-term field strategy of the team.
Yeah.
And so all these trips that we have done, now one of those was KYR, a student retreat for students of workers of Central Asia. Now, so we do that every year that we can. We didn't in 2021.
Right.
But all these other trips have been for the purpose of investing in teams in member care, team retreats, and they have suffered from the transition and the lack of travel. Lack of travel here means lack of visitors and friends there.
Right.
They haven't had friends come visit them. They haven't gotten together for team retreats. So we've been able to get to know, for a couple of these. So we said Caucasus, Kurds, and Uyghurs. For one of these people groups, it's a newer focus, and we've been able to get to know a team, get involved with a team. And when we do that in a team retreat, the workers are, bar none, encouraged, not just by our being there, but by our plan, intentionality, and strategy to be there again later. Mm-hmm. The fact that we are there once is great. The fact that we expect to be there in 5 years and are committed to that is very encouraging.
So let's say from a worship perspective, how does that translate? Worship, including the preaching, teaching of the word. How does that translate with repeated trips with a team?
Yeah. Well, there's relationship. You're not starting over.
Right.
And it's something I heard just recently. We become one of them. We're holding the rope. Not distantly, but closely.
Right.
We have actual relationships.
Right.
And so when people go on a trip, invest in people, and then return, then that we capitalize on that. And then when those people who return bring new people from their growth group with them, then we're creating a generational effect with a team in Central Asia.
Right.
Where the two reasons people leave the field, team conflict. Mm-hmm. So we're investing in the health of teams.
Right.
And family difficulties. And we're investing in the health of families.
Yes.
So preaching the word, sharing in worship, leadership development, discipleship, just encouragement, coming alongside, supporting, all these things foster longevity among workers because we're aimed at those two things.
Yes. So another source of encouragement is we've built relationships. Evangelism work is what people think mission trip. We're going to drop you on the ground. You're going to go straight to the work of evangelism. Well, culture, language. You got multiple barriers in Central Asia, but because of these long-term team relationships, we're now being brought into, and we kept saying this is going to happen. We're being brought into. So, just give one example of how that's translated with one of our teams being there.
So I'm thinking particularly of one of those teams I just mentioned that we just met. We've just gotten connected to. We did a retreat for them. And it's a people group that is persecuted, experienced a lot of difficulty and struggle. And we were able to be in their home for dinner in one of these people groups' homes for dinner, and not just home for dinner in their home for dinner, but we shared the gospel with them. We weren't expecting to, because the guy's English wasn't great, and the worker had only been there a month. So his language, one of the workers a month, one of the workers 3 months. Their language, their Turkish wasn't great. Their English wasn't great, and the Lord brought this other brother to his home who knew English really well, and we shared the full gospel. We talked for 4 hours about the gospel. So, yeah, it was quite a blessing.
Yeah,
encouragement.
And those kind of things just continue to open up. But ultimately, I want everybody to remember the reason we have the strategy we take. And I know sometimes people want to push back and say, well, all we're doing is childcare. Well, that's just not even true. It's they're the ones there.
That's right.
They're the tip of the spear. We want to keep them there.
Mm-hmm.
We want them back in that man's home and that man and that family in their home, sharing the gospel and moving toward them. All right. So, because of our effort in Central Asia, you look at a map, Ukraine is not Central Asia, but Ukraine is surrounded by and affected everything that we are doing, and the devastation that is going on. Just watching the news this morning and what they've just flattened Mariupol. I mean, I just,
yeah.
How can you treat people like that? But anyway, I'm so encouraged that Christy, who is pastoring a rapidly growing church, he could say, I don't have time for refugees. And he has led his church to embrace these people and basically stop what they're doing other than worship and be the people of God. And just want to remind Parkwood that you can give to that online. There's now a specific area, it says Ukraine assistance, I think, or something like that. Just look for the word Ukraine. That'll go to help with that. So those of you who are asking, what can you do? You can do. But one of the lesser known consequences of the war, and I've mentioned this in prayer, we've talked about it, is this war in Ukraine has affected gospel work. So workers have had to either leave or be kicked out Ukraine and then surrounding countries. And because of our involvement in Central Asia and the connection that we have, recently we got a call from leadership. So I want you to be very specific as you can be about what happened.
Yeah. So they're having to move workers, relocate workers, and this happened in a matter of a few days.
Yes.
So many families, well, just about most families, had a maximum of 3 days to pack up their apartment, pack up what they could, and bring with them. Because of the number of workers and the number of kids, they needed assistance. They needed help with young kids, and they needed help to help with school with middle-aged kids, and then with students, they needed debriefing and just conversation.
Yeah.
So the situation is these workers come out, and all of a sudden, by virtue of their getting on a plane, in this instance, they're homeless. They come to a hotel where they have to figure out where they're going to go. So they are in, a pretty intense time of somewhere from difficulty to confusion, and in the process of decision making all the while. So we went as support, and they called us on a Monday morning. I got a call at 6:30 a.m. And they said, best case scenario, you are here by Friday, which means this is Monday morning and we leave Thursday afternoon. And by God's grace, 3 o'clock Monday afternoon, we had what they wanted. We had 8 people ready to go. We didn't even have an end date at that point. We had 8 people that would go and find out when they would come home. And so I'm grateful that we were able to be a support like that. We did childcare, but it's more than, I know of no workers, and it was just in a briefing this morning, I know of no workers there that are leaving the field in the midst of all this difficulty. They're all committed to being there, finding out where their home is gonna be. They all have short-term answers right now, but where their home is gonna be in 90 days or something. So it was a privilege to be a part of.
So as I thought about this, Andrew, we use the word childcare. We went to take care of their children.
Yeah.
It wasn't they were dropping them off to go to worship or to have a date night.
Yeah.
I want you to tell the story about one of the 10 or 8 or 9, whatever you said, 10-year-old child, what he had to do in his apartment.
Yeah. He had a suitcase and he had to go through his room and decide what to put in the suitcase. I mean, it wasn't all going to fit.
So he had 2 piles.
Yeah. And a pile he's going to take with him and a pile he's going to leave behind. Now, some of those kids knew they were leaving it behind for good.
Yeah, this is heartbreaking.
I mean, you know,
Go ahead.
he knew what he was doing. He was making 2 piles. And these guys don't know what's going to happen to their stuff. They might never see it again. Likely will never see it again. But some of these kids found out at the hotel that they would never go back home. I mean, they were homeless. And you got 10, 12-year-old kids, younger than that too, that are coming to terms with, I didn't get to say goodbye to my friends. I got some stuff that I wish I had that I won't see anymore. And I was born there. I mean, these aren't people that are just on vacation for longer term than we go. This is their home. They were born there. They've grown up there. And yeah, their life's been turned upside down.
So I want to say this. I don't want to say this in a strong rebuke, but maybe it needs to be received this way to some people. Parkwood and everybody listen to me. You don't ever walk up to a worker, and you particularly don't walk up to a TCK, a kid who grew up overseas, and say, "Aren't you glad to be back in the U.S.?" That would be like walking up to a kid who grew up in Gastonia and you drop him in Los Angeles today and say, "Aren't you glad to be in Los Angeles?"
Yeah.
It's home for these children. This is all they've known. They speak another language. They're bilingual. That they have friends, their apartment.
Yeah.
It may not be the standards of the U.S. That's what they know.
That's right.
So if you're not getting anything from us right now, be encouraged that we have people who do this and be burdened to pray for them.
Yeah. I would say, if I could press it a little bit further and say, that's the child, the student who's beginning to get some independence, who's, they went to the field with their parents, not being consulted. I wouldn't, consult my 4-year-old on whether I should go or not, or if they're born there.
Yeah.
But you got teenagers who, some of them are feeling that pull to the U.S. Mm-hmm. This is home, but sometimes they struggle with being there.
Yeah.
Because what they see on social media, be careful what you post, what they see on social media or experiences they've had while they're stateside. And they're struggling with being here, with being under the roof of their parents in a difficult situation. And then you throw an environment like this, circumstances like this. They need to debrief with somebody. Yes. They need to walk through this with somebody. And their parents are there. But particularly in this instance, their parents are trying to decide where they're going to live.
Right.
And so the fact that we could be there and talk to them and hang out with them is more than just childcare.
Yeah. And they know us.
Yeah.
The students particularly, they know us.
Yeah.
And those relationships are ongoing and wonderful to be a part of. There are a lot of other things. We're going to have to do another podcast to talk more about other encouragements, because we could talk about what's been happening with refugees, the Haitian refugees here at church, and that's a conversation. That's probably an entire podcast. We can talk about those who are about to go from our church. Yeah. We got some people about to leave, right, midterm and long term, to take up this incredible weight that we're talking about here, but to do it with joy for the sake of the gospel. So one of the things that we've been burdened to, one of the other things that got lost in COVID was having a prayer group. How do you practice social distancing and get people in a room praying together? So we encouraged prayer multiple ways, but we're going to have our first night of prayer again.
I'm excited about that.
April 8th, 6:30 p.m. We're going to have childcare all the way through 5th grade. Now, those of you with children in that age group, you need to determine whether they need to be in this prayer meeting or not.
Right.
Sometimes you got to decide as a parent. They can pray too, and they can be a part. But you need to determine. And certainly, you encourage our students to be a part. But from a global perspective, we're going to have multiple areas of prayer. So give us a couple of things from a global perspective we're going to pray for.
So we're going to pray for Central Asia. I mean, the stuff that we are talking about right now.
Yes.
We need to pray for these things.
Yes.
We're going to hear from the affinity leader of Central Asia, and he's going to tell us how we can be praying for Central Asia. And then the conflict, Russia, Ukraine, all that.
Yeah.
The displacement of workers, the continuation of gospel proclamation in the midst of this.
Yes.
We want to pray for these things.
Yes. Yes. And we have specific workers there that were in Ukraine. They're not Central Asian workers. We'll hear from them.
That's right.
And how we can pray.
Right.
So these are going to be very specific things. Beyond that, it's April 8th. We're going to be praying for just Easter and all surrounded. You're going to hear more. You're hearing more about how we're equipping you to tell the story. It's not just we're going to tell the story. How do we tell the story? We'll talk about some of the people going as a part. Jackson, Sarah, Jacob, and Carmen. We're going to pray for these openings in our church, these places that we still need worship pastor and others. I think it'll be a tremendous night of encouragement to where we bring our burdens that we feel deeply and we still feel pain about, but we trust the Lord and we see how the Lord is worked and moves. So, Andrew, I look forward to hearing more of these things happening and transpiring around the world. Brothers and sisters, I just want to say, Andrew's talking about, we got these first level trips. You call them what? The very first mission trip.
Global exposure trips.
Global exposure trip. You need to get your feet on the ground, get your feet wet so that we can prepare you to be on this list to call.
That's right.
To go and to take in these moments. You need a passport and you need to keep it updated. Mine expired during COVID. So so that's probably happened to a lot of us. So let's make sure that we're prepared and ready to go. Now, Andrew, I wanted to ask you also, you're a serious reader. You read all the time. So what are you reading or getting ready to read that you think could be an encouragement and a help to the congregation?
One of my favorite authors is D.A. Carson, and he wrote a book called Scandalous. So every year, I haven't read this yet. Every year leading up to Easter, I read a book in the area of Christology, the person of Christ. And so this year I'm reading Scandalous. So I pulled it off my shelf today. I'm going to start reading it this week. And
the subtitle of Scandalous is
The Cross and the Resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I looked through the table of contents. I think I'm going to add that to mine because it fits so much with where we're going to tell the story, how Luke is presenting the gospel. Yeah. And you say, how can you guys recommend a book you hadn't read? Because we've read a lot of D.A. Carson.
That's right.
He's clear. He's deeply theological, but in a way that anybody can understand it. So maybe some others would like to join us in reading Scandalous.
Maybe I'll have some extra copies on Sunday.
There you go. Sounds great. Thanks for joining.